Whether you're an avid whiskey connoisseur or an entry-level whiskey drinker, Glenmorangie offers a lifestyle that is brilliant for everyone. Today we're here at the Polo Lounge at the Westcliff, and I'm going to be interviewing Dr. Bill Lumsden from Glenmorangie, all the way here from Scotland, and he's going to tell us exactly what the Glenmorangie lifestyle is all about. Hello, good to see you. What are you doing here in South Africa?
I'm here just doing some promotional work, working with the local team and spreading the word about Glenmorangie whisky.
So what are you here to say about Glenmorangie?
Okay, what I'm here to say about Glenmorangie is that first of all it is a single malt Scotch whisky, and as a growing number of consumers realise, single malt is at the luxury end of whisky production, and it's the most interesting in terms of flavour. And Glenmorangie is famous among Scotch whiskies as having arguably the most complex range of flavours of any whisky. But it's also quite soft in terms of flavour, so it's one of these unique whiskies that can appeal to new drinkers and lady drinkers, as well as satisfying connoisseur drinkers.
Take us through the day in the life of a Glenmorangie whiskey connoisseur.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Happily, for someone like myself who has a notoriously short attention span and very low boredom threshold, I don't really have such a thing as a typical day. But if I was to kind of choose one, like I spent a whole week in the office back in Scotland before I came here, which is quite unusual, and maybe a normal day for me would be I tend to get into the office at about 8 o'clock, and then I like to get into my sensory lab. I prefer to do sensory work, nosing and tasting the whisky in the morning, because your palate tends to be fresher then. Once I've done that, I might give a call to my distillery managers, although they're pretty good at phoning me. The two distilleries we have, Glenmorangie, is about 250 miles away from the head office where I'm based, and Ardbeg is on an island off the west coast. So I speak to them, Andy and Mickey, almost every day, just to see what's happening, to see if there's any production issues, to get their feel for what the quality of the spirit, because they actually physically produce the spirit according to my specification, and then I'll assess it and pass it, or otherwise, happily, I nearly always pass it.
How did you get into it?
While I was studying for my PhD in Edinburgh, I actually tasted malt whisky for the first time. And again, you're probably thinking, Christine, well, he would say this, but it was actually Glenmorangie 10-year-old was the first whisky I tasted. And that got me into the category. I became a passionate whisky consumer.
Do you have a preference? Which one is your favourite?
Yeah, again, I asked that question a lot, and it is Glenmorangie Original, I think. The DNA of the Glenmorangie brand is encapsulated in that one, so that's the one I drink most of. And the other good thing about this is that you can drink it neat. You can have it with water, you can have it with ice. I occasionally, some people raise their eyebrows at this, but occasionally I'll have a tumbler with a few rocks of ice, a big measure of Original, top it up with ginger ale, and then have some freshly squeezed lime juice in it, and it's just, especially on a nice hot summer's day.
What is the significance of pairing golf and whiskey? Is it just the Scottish lifestyle, or is it?
I think it's it's not just the Scottish lifestyle. That golf is hugely popular in many countries. It's very popular in parts of continental Europe. It's unbelievably popular in the United States and Japan. I think in these two countries more so than anywhere else. And for reasons that I'm not 100% clear on, playing golf and enjoying a dram of whisky seem to go hand in hand. It's probably because, of course, the game originated in Scotland, which is the home of whisky. So it was a very natural kind of pairing for us to become the official malt whisky of the British Open.
You've just recently introduced Tony Jacklin as one of your ambassadors. Tell me about that.
Yeah, well, the interesting story behind that was that before we approached Tony Jacklin to be an ambassador, he already was a huge fan of Glenmorangie.
Who would you say, where would you say is sort of a very memorable place where you've enjoyed your Glenmorangie whisky? It's something that you can remember forever.
Some of my visits to Japan have been really memorable because in the country of Japan, the profession of bartending is taken very, very seriously. My most memorable situation of many was last year I visited Osaka, and it's a bar I've been to a number of times before called Bar Lee, named after Vivian Lee, the actress, but Bar Lee Cadball. And of course, Cadball is where we have the Glenmorangie Corporate Hospitality Hotel, so Mr. Hayashi has named it after that. And he made a drink specially for me, which he called the Cadball Highball. And it was a highball made with Glenmorangie Original, one long rectangular cube of ice in a tall tumbler, and he put a small measure of Glenmorangie La Santa in it and topped it up with soda, and it just was the most perfect whiskey experience, so that really sticks out in my mind.
What is the cabinet of curiosities?
Right. So to help launch these products, they prepared this old-fashioned cabinet with artefacts reflecting my personality, my life, and aspects of the whiskey. So for example, the one we had at the Savoy Hotel down in London had the old leather ledger with the old recipe, which I tried to recreate. It had a photograph of my pet cat, who of course is called Morangie. It had bits and pieces like that, so some very personal things in there, and it just adds a dimension of interest to launching the product.
That's amazing. And just last question, who is the Glenmorangie drinker?
Okay, the Glenmorangie drinker, as far as I'm concerned, as far as the company is concerned, is someone who has very eclectic taste, who likes lots of different things, will equally appreciate soul music, jazz music, classical music, someone who's not afraid to innovate and try different things, someone who appreciates all sorts of different cuisine and cultures, and someone who aspires towards enjoying quite sophisticated and elegant things. So if you were to ask me to say one word to sum up Glenmorangie, elegant is the word I would use, because it is an elegant and complex whiskey.